Well, let's now turn to the big focus story. We are looking at the reality of drowsy pilots. Yes, that's right. What we are going to show our viewers today are figures that indicate that there's a real problem with the issue of pilot fatigue. Are you being flown on autopilot? 66% of Indian pilots have admitted to dozing off in the cockpit. In fact, they say that they have, on many occasions, inadvertently fallen asleep. Around 66%, yes, that's the number we're looking at, of 542 Indian pilots who took part in this recent survey on fatigue triggering daytime sleepiness admitted to dozing off in the cockpit without alerting their fellow crew members or experiencing drowsiness on the job. So if pilots snooze, how safe are you? Are pilots often sleeping on the wheel? Because this survey indicates that this has been happening often enough. The survey covered pilots engaged in regional, domestic and international operations and measured their fatigue levels on the Epworth sleepiness scale. That's the method that was employed to assess this. So based on their responses, it was found that about 54% of the pilots suffer from severe excessive daytime sleepiness, while 41% suffer from moderate daytime sleepiness. So the survey concludes, the survey in fact was conducted by an NGO called Safety Matters Foundation. The survey concludes that that is the basis on which they have come to the conclusion on 66% of Indian pilots having sleep deprivation issues which can directly affect their functioning on the job. So why ignore the fatigue factors? The question we are asking. Are pilots overworked at your risk? Before we go to the panelists on these questions, let's put out the findings of the survey, and that's the graphics that you have on your screens right now. Findings of the pilot fatigue survey: 54.2% suffer from severe excessive daytime sleepiness, 41.4% moderate daytime sleepiness, 66% admitted to falling asleep without alerting co-pilots, 31% admitted having a close call which could have led to a fatigue-related incident. 73% blamed fatigue on early morning departures. 71% said that they felt so tired that they shouldn't have been in the cockpit on that day. So this is quite a detailed survey. I believe this is for the very first time that we have these kind of statistics now available to us. My colleague Madhav tracking this story very closely. Madhav, good evening. If you can put things in perspective for us. You know, why I found this interesting is that we've often spoken about breath analyzer tests and the DGCA putting all measures in place to detect, levels of alcohol in pilots. But I don't recall a single instance of any rule being announced to detect fatigue, and if that can be related to passenger safety.
Well, Afrida, yes and no, because, you're partially correct to the extent that, yes, such surveys have been carried out in the past, but in such detail. For instance, in 2020, there was a similar survey that was carried out, which also had spoken about whether the employers are doing enough to address fatigue-related issues, and majority of the pilots at that time, or close to 50% at least, had said that that is not the case. Now, of course, admitting specifically to the point and the question of drowsiness is, of course, something that is very, very serious, because as the study itself and its findings note, that if a pilot works for more than a certain number of hours, about 16 to 17 hours, then the responsiveness of the pilot is as much as someone with a breath analyzer or a blood alcohol result of 0.05%. Remember that when pilots are checked for blood alcohol, they are supposed to have absolutely no alcohol in their system, unlike, for instance, in cars where 1 unit of alcohol is allowed. So the question at this point of time is that whether enough is being done for pilots to ensure that the rest period is adequate. Now remember that there are specific rules relating to flight duty time limitation to the FDTL, which shows that there is enough rest period, particularly when pilots on the long haul travel international sectors. There is enough and adequate rest given of the number of flight, and depending on the duration of the flight that they have traveled, the duration of the rest period is also calculated so that they're well rested in time for the next leg of their flight. Now, when it comes to domestic operations, short and medium haul flights, that is not the case, because often their shifts are changed. Often they have to fly either early morning or later in the day, and this is something that can cause a huge amount of variation in their fatigue levels, is what the study observes. Of course, it remains to be seen what can be done as far as this is concerned. Perhaps regulators and authorities could pay heed to what pilots have to say on this, because at the end of the day, if this affects the safety of passengers and if this can help reduce incidents in the air, certainly, of course, it is something in the welfare of all of us who are, of course, at some point of time going to be passengers. It would be in the best interest to perhaps listen into what the pilots themselves have to say. Let's also say that this is not a small number, at least 500 pilots having been surveyed for this. So this is not a number that can, be brushed aside as a very small sample size, for instance. So it's a significant number of pilots who have been surveyed, and therefore these findings should perhaps be taken with that amount of seriousness.
Absolutely, should be taken with seriousness. Madhav, like you rightly said, after all, this is about creating conducive, healthy work environment for the pilots who are on the job, and for the passenger safety aspect as well, like you said. Thanks very much, Madhav, for giving us the details. Let's, in fact, go across to our panelists, our experts joining us on the program, who will explain to us the important aspects of this story. I'm joined by Dr. Sanat Kaul, former Civil Aviation Joint Secretary, Government of India. Sarosh Damania, Aviation Lawyer, is also with us. I'm hoping to be joined by Captain S S Panesar as well, who's a former pilot. I would like to know the perspective from Captain Panesar, very importantly, so I hope he connects with us. But let's get started with this big question that we are putting out. Are we being flown on autopilot? There is, of course, that sense that, now technology has improved to an extent that perhaps it's not a 100% hands-on job anymore. But even so, it's not something that you can have a pilot literally sleeping on the wheel. Dr. Sanat Kaul, is the DGCA aware, and is the DGCA seized of this matter? Because my colleague tells me that as of now, we do have rules in place when it comes to time limitations and the rest period. But when it comes to detecting the fatigue levels before taking the job of flying an aircraft, is there enough rules in place?
Well, it's a bit of a mixed up thing, because there is a flight duty time limitation rules. Now, there is a concept of optimizer, in which they optimize this and they try and follow it. I'm talking about the operators now. They follow it in a manner that it helps them to take the planes, fly as much as possible. Whereas the pilots have their own views about fatigue. So there's a bit of a tussle, one. Second, about alcohol intake, now they put 100% test before going, which is not a very nice thing to happen. But that has been done because of past experience, that the carelessness at which, the crew tends to avoid or not look into this rule has also caused that. So if you drink and you feel sleepy during the daytime, it's quite natural. Therefore, that's another aspect. Now, what is flight duty limitation has not been studied. I mean, I'm not fully aware of it. It is a technical thing where an optimizer comes in and they optimize it over a month or a couple of months. And then, at one end, they have saying that, if pilots are given every early morning departure, then they tend to have fatigue. Now, did they sleep on time before that or not? I don't know. We don't know much. The NGO which has done this thing is also a pilot's NGO. So, all right, they must have done a good job, but I'm not saying it's totally independent, to put it this thing.
Fair enough.
And the third thing is about these, there is a shortage of commanders. The commanders are in short supply, and there's an excess of normal pilots. This is leading to some problem for commanders. They are probably asked to work harder. There is also this story that, they don't want to promote too many pilots into commanders for, various reasons. So the whole thing needs to be studied.
Right.
impartially
You know, I have a
to
very
say
basic
exactly
thing to
what's
globally,
happening.
what are the standards followed? That is something we always look at. And while I was looking at this subject, what I found is there's something called fatigue risk management system, which under it, of course, there are several pointers, and I will not go into all the nitty-gritties, but suffice to say that DGCA has so far chosen not to implement FRMS, the fatigue risk management system. As such, there are no regulations which have been drawn up to address the increased threat levels that pilots have repeatedly been complaining about. So, are we following global standards or not? Sarosh Damania, as an aviation lawyer, do you think we have fallen short of maintaining the best practices?
See, as far as our aviation laws are concerned, we have got the laws which are dated way. So we are still following the Aircraft Act, which is a very old act. Thereafter, the carriage by air standards, rules which are there. They have not, there are updates to the rules, but of course, if you see global standards, the rules and the compliance is what, in some aspects, yes, it is up to 100% standards. But like if you see alcohol, India is more stricter maybe than say US or UK. That is one good thing. But when it comes to fatigue level, now these are all things which are modern day symptoms, which while the framers of the rules or at the time of the rules when they were made, this was not a problem because that point of time the aviation industry in India was pretty small.
Okay.
Now, of course, expansion and modernization and aviation trying to compete with railways and so many airlines is coming in. The aviation market is in a massive boom. So there is excessive demand for pilots. It's a global. It is a fact that there is a global shortage for pilots which is going on. So not only pilots, the existing pilots are made to work at the fullest extent. So yes, of course, there are rules that maximum number of hours a pilot can fly aircraft in a month, the break duration that is required. But what is happening is airlines, to maximize their profit or to maximize utilization of the pilot, are continuously using the pilots to the maximum optimization because of pilot shortage. So each pilot which is supposed, so they are maybe same pilot is going to operate the 5 o'clock flight in the morning, and maybe the same pilot is again asked to fly the 10 p.m. flight at night. So problem is the duration of rest which is there. Of course, there might be a gap in the two flights, but does the pilot get enough time to travel back home, take enough rest, come back to the airport, take another flight, go back to the destination? That is the most important thing. So this is, of course, not only the regulators or the law, but the airline industry, the airlines in themselves should liquidate this problem, because this is basically can be solved very easily by the rostering itself. So this is
Yes,
more of
you know,
a
where I
PR
find
issue.
absolutely, but with the concern where I found is that pilots have admitted, at least in this survey, that inadvertently we may doze off. That possibility is there and it has happened. Captain S S Panesar is also with us. He's a former pilot. Captain Panesar, you can be frank with us. Tell us, how often does it happen? Do pilots snooze on the job? And do pilots have to keep their eyes on, like if I'm driving, it's not possible that if I'm sleeping on the wheel and I'll be safe. Obviously, that is not something that works out, for at least when it comes to a car. But when it comes to an aircraft, do you think that pilots take that kind of leeway with themselves?
Ma'am, at the outset, let me congratulate you that you have taken up this subject. Even I've been discussing with Madhav a number of times that we must take up this issue. This fatigue is a very, very serious issue with the pilots. I have attended many conferences in the world. I have flown 25,000 hours in 37 years, different types of aircraft. I will tell you the exact picture about fatigue.
Okay.
In the main conference, the main anthem was any airline, in case they feel flight safety is expensive, try an accident. You will come to know what is the cost of safety and all that. Now, DGCA is a regulatory body. ICAO is an international regulatory body. They laid down the flight and duty time limitation, the maximum limits to which a pilot can be used. But our airlines are misusing that policy. They are using that to maximum, and that's how the pilots are fatigued. No, any pilot fatigue, he has to sleep in the air. He needs sleep. His family life is disturbed. His flying is disturbed. Only our airline they should not use the pilot to the maximum limit laid down by the DGCA. DGCA says you can fly 125 hours in a month, but then you have to go for a medical. If a pilot does 125 hours, you can see his family life, his health life. Today, the airlines are not bothered. They say we pay them heavy money, we'll use them to the maximum. But they are not bothered in case of any incident and accident that takes place. What will be the cost of that safety? It is high time you have taken up this issue. It should be continuously told to the
So
airline.
you are saying that
to
there's
look
an
after the health of the
exploitative
pilot.
mindset? You're saying that pilots' time is maximized across board without factoring in individual issues? Even with the issue of sleep deprivation, one person may be different from the other. But across board, the DGCA has a rule of maximizing the time of the pilot, the flying time, and that is how it works. So, Dr. Sanat Kaul, you brought up this issue, and therefore I want to go back to it, that there are very stringent measures when it comes to alcohol detection. But again, when I went into the subject, I found that the effect of sleep deprivation can have a very similar impact on a pilot's performance. But then isn't it the same risk that you're taking when you're allowing a fatigued pilot to take the job, to fly the aircraft?
No, absolutely. No, you're right. Absolutely. What I was trying to say was that these two things are in a way interrelated. If you stop alcohol totally, like in other countries or other places, that they should not be drinking, sleep normally, improves. But that's not the point I'm trying to make. There is a flight duty limitation, which has very general rules, and then the responsibility of following it is with the operator of the airline, who has this concept of optimizer, whereas he can use the pilots very heavily for continuously for say a week, and then give them leave for some time. Now that is not good enough, because if they are doing a lot of work for 3 or 4 days, 5 days continuously, they are deprived of sleep. So it works. I mean, it's a very conflicting thing, which I also not in a position to fully elaborate, because I'm not very much in touch with it. But between the issue of flight duty limitation, sleep
But we can see,
deprivation,
Dr. Sanat Kaul, that pilots are unanimous in this. There is no difference of opinion within the pilot community. They all have come out together. Like you said, this is again an NGO where a former pilot, of course, has taken the initiative to conduct this survey. Fair enough. But the fact is, the pilots across board agree that there is a fatigue issue which is not being addressed, which needs urgent attention. Sarosh Damania, if I can ask you this.
that.
Okay, quickly respond, Dr. Kaul.
No, I accept that. I'm not saying that
Okay.
it's not a thing, but I'm saying there are 2 or 3 things interconnected, and they have to be studied properly.
Yes,
And
okay.
with an independent NGO.
All
That's
right.
all.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sarosh Damania, whose responsibility is it really? Is it the DGCA or is it that individual airline that has to, make sure that there is a rest and recovery period? We all know by now how important sleep is. It is one of the most underrated factor when it comes to health. Not enough is spoken about it, but I think, to be on a job that continuously requires you to be sleep deprived, isn't that, who actually is to ensure that pilots are in prime form, physically and mentally?
Of course, this sleeping or drowsing during, of course, controlling an aircraft with so many passengers on board is, of course, one of the greatest safety issues which is there, which is, of course, being overlooked by the DGCA and the airline both. Primarily, it is the duty of the DGCA, which is the regulatory body in India, to frame some rules. So what they can do is, of course, rules exist, but the rules are being exploited by the airlines to maximize their business. So what can the DGCA do is, DGCA can come out with some additional rules that how will these timings be regulated, how much time minimum a pilot should get rest in detail. So what is there is rules exist, but they are not being implemented properly because the airlines are misusing it. Of course, and airlines also need to come out. They need to put their profits a little bit aside for passenger safety, because passenger safety should be looked at. This is time and again comes out that sometimes airlines want to cut corners to save some costs to maximize their profit. So this is also, but this is one of the important aspects. And of course, pilots coming out, this has been a very old issue. But what happens is, pilots who are on the job are unable to speak this out because of fear of losing their job or not being promoted or something. So that is why all these surveys and all, time and again, they have come out, but they come out anonymously, because this is the problem is, actual people who are flying, who are suffering, cannot speak because of fear of their job. That is there. After, of course, there are unions, there are associations which are coming up, taking up this issue. But this issue needs to be taken care of. And of course, I think the DGCA should step in and, of course, assist the pilots, because they are one of the key factors or the key persons in the aviation industry, because of whom the airline is making money and aircrafts are flying. So they need to be taken care of, and DGCA should come up with some guidelines at least to regulate that, and they should have some inspections or something on the rostering or some rostering of pilots, and monitor the airlines rostering for some period of time at least till this issue is resolved. And of course, if a pilot is found to be fatigued, if it has to be sleep deprived, they should have an alternate person to fly the aircraft. You cannot have any person who's not in a fit state of mind, because see, being sleepy puts you not in a fit state of mind to fly aircraft.
Yes, which is what the pilots are saying, Mr. Damania. They're saying it's not intentional, but it has happened that inadvertently, without our realizing, we have dozed off on the job. It's a candid admission that pilots have made, and when we looked at the figures, the numbers looked staggering. Captain Panesar, last word to you. A couple of things have come out in this discussion that yes, there is a possibility that there's an issue of manpower shortage, there's an issue of airlines cutting corners, but then again, from the perspective of somebody who's flown all your life, tell us, how can we resolve this? What can be the immediate solution, and who should be addressing it?
Let me tell you one thing. I would say you cannot blame the DGCA. DGCA has laid down a maximum limit, and they come into picture if you violate those rules. But the airline should take care of the health of the pilot, whom they have spent crores of rupees in training a commander and co-pilot. They should not let them use to the maximum limit so that they can, because they are paying them. And pilots are not refusing because of the scare they might be asked to leave the airline. But most of the pilots who are tired, they started taking sick leave. They say, I'm sick, I am not flying next day. And they take action against these people. DGCA is not to be blamed. They are the police people. They see the rules are not violated. They laid on the maximum limit. But airlines should take care of the pilots whom they have trained for command and the safety of passengers in their hand. Why should they not get proper rest? They should not let the pilots to fly to the maximum limits every month. Maybe once in a while a pilot has to see the limit, fine, but not to the maximum limit laid down by DGCA. DGCA comes in only when you violate the rule. I don't blame the DGCA for this. They have laid down the limit, maximum limit. They're not supposed to violate that. But
so you're saying the airlines, you're saying the individual airlines have to take greater responsibility?
Yes, individual airlines is responsible not to use them to maximum limit. They have doctors, they have scientists, they can take the help of everybody. They have unions, but their own directors are not capable. Why doesn't their own director of operation come out and advise the airline? They should tell them about the health of the pilot, how they are fatigued. But they are all quiet. They are all become chamchas to the management. They don't want to suggest even things. They're scared of losing a job. But I can tell you, only the government should rise to the occasion and take action, and the airline should rise up. Why should we wait for an incident or accident to take place on the grounds of fatigue? That will be a saddest day for us. The airline has to rise to occasion.
Absolutely. That's precisely the reason we decided to take up this topic, because there's no way there should be any compromise on passenger safety. We keep reporting instances of mishaps in aircrafts. Of course, as of now, we haven't reported an incident where a pilot has fallen asleep and there has been a mishap, but God forbid, we do not want that such a day should ever come. And therefore, there must be a consensus built around this issue. All stakeholders perhaps should sit together, find a roadmap to ensure that, like you said, Captain Panesar, that it's not as if just because there's a rule of maximum limit, every time the airline uses it up to the maximum, that is creating a problem here from what we can see. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us with your views on the subject.